of our program funders wants to look at client records and mentioned even making copies. I'm really uncomfortable with this. How would you handle this, especially when you need the continued program funding?
Oh, I'm uncomfortable with that question.
I was uncomfortable reading it.
I'm just cringing. If any of our listeners can see our faces. Completely inappropriate. I mean, that is absolutely inappropriate. So you can, especially if I'm going to assume here, big assumption, that you have a client intake process that protects the confidentiality of client information.
Yep.
And I can at least say, and I hope you have that. And if not, then that's another question, another episode, right? But so I think you can share things in general, like, okay, we serve this many individuals and here's their demographics, but without, this person could get into, client names and their backgrounds. And why do they need to know those kinds of specifics? I think it's an opportunity for a conversation. What do you help me understand why you need this information?
Absolutely. That was my first thought too, is like, this seems like a really weird request, a really sort of uncomfortable and weird request, but taking, maybe I just don't understand why they're asking, maybe finding out specifically what they're looking for. Because I can think of even like state funders, like city governments, state governments, they have a process that they need to go through to be able to verify that you're spending the money the way they think you're supposed to be spending the money. But that shouldn't ever get to the level of making photocopies of client records. That seems wrong. And if it was supposed to be like that, if that's part of the state grant or something like that, you need to figure out what they're asking for, because no reputable funder is going to be asking you for that level of detail.
No, that's awful. So good luck. But yeah, and I think it's in addition to having sort of a coming
good
at
luck.
This from a place. Yeah, good luck to you.
Good luck.
Good luck. Good luck with that one. C'est la vie. No, I feel like there's an opportunity here to talk to the program funders, because we have no clue maybe there was a misinterpretation. Again, I like to try to come from a place of grace and giving people the benefit of the doubt. Or maybe it's a new program officer that didn't understand their boss's directions, whatever. You have no clue. So trying to dig a little bit deeper and then sharing, well, gosh, we have this policy and here's what we uphold from a client confidentiality standpoint, but here's what I can give you. Then it just turns it into a much more positive conversation instead of hell no.
Yeah. And and on the other hand, like if they are asking for things that they shouldn't have, that's time for you as an organization to stand your guns. Like, because I tell this story a lot. I don't think I've told it on the podcast, but years ago, we actually got a donation. It was a check in the mail, and it specifically said, I would like you to please make sure that you use the money in this check to make sure that you're only feeding American citizens.
Ugh.
Right? What do? We sent the check back. We said, Thank you for your $25. I'm afraid we can't meet your requirements. And we sent it back. And because at the end of the day, you just don't want that money.
No.
That's not, you can't. And in this case, it was really easy. It was $25, right? So if it's a lot of money, you need to start asking yourself, like, is this a funder that we want to continue to do business with? Do we want to really continue whatever their weird political nonsense is? Do we want to do that? And then that becomes a board question. And you can also cover your butt by making sure that you bring that to the board. So if it gets to the point where the funder says, I need to see this or there won't be any more funding, that's when you make sure your board is involved and you say, hey, this is the position that I put myself in because they're asking for this. We accepted this money. Is it okay if I tell them to go pound sand?
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding.
Hey, everybody. Happy summer. And Andy's laughing because we just talked about how obnoxious it is when I say
it's
these.
Not obnoxious. It's just you can only use them once.
I know. We can only use them once, so I make his life really difficult. But I'm still using it because it's summertime, and I hope everyone's enjoying their summer. So welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything, our twice a month podcast that's made possible by ANN, the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. We hope you're subscribing. If not, you can do so now. You can share this with a friend. And of course, your reviews, 5 stars or otherwise, hopefully 5 stars will help us as well. So ranking this, rating this, we appreciate.
Today's episode is sponsored by Brenda J. Stout CPA, a full-service accounting firm specializing in nonprofit tax compliance and IRS problem resolution. Find out more at brendastoutcpa.com or check the Nonprofit Everything show notes for contact information. Thank you, Brenda J. Stout CPA.
Thank you, Brenda. All right, this question is for you, Andy. Help. I am trying to figure out where the board's role starts and the executive director's role ends when it comes to budgeting. For example, if I need my board's approval on the budget, then do I also need their approval on the salary increases and/or bonus structure I want to implement?
I think it depends on the sort of the size of your organization and the nature of your board. So if you have, this is my opinion, right? So, okay, we'll just start with the correct answer, right? Which is there's no wrong answer to this.
Yes.
It's what works the best for you and what works the best for your board. Would you agree?
Yeah. It feels a little bit to me. My gut reaction when I heard this question was, God, I don't really want, if there's an executive director, I really wouldn't want the board trying to determine salary increases for my employees. That feels a little they can ask questions about it, but helping make that decision, who are they? They don't know the employee's day-to-day performance.
Right.
I think I cringe a little with this question because if there is an executive director, a paid executive director in an organization, that executive director hires and fires and reviews staff. And part of that review process is figuring out what type of salary increase or bonus they want to implement. And so to me, that feels, now that can be based on work an HR committee, right? Put together maybe a compensation or cost of living analysis or whatever that is, that can be sort of separate and help inform that executive director's work. But
Right.
to me, that just feels a little bit like, that is the executive director's responsibility.
Yeah, but I think it depends on the size of the organization too, because part of the board's role and their fiduciary role, right, is to make sure that the organization is spending money in the most effective way. That they're not spending money on things they shouldn't be spending money on. You got a finance committee that's looking into those kinds of details.
True.
You may have an HR committee that's looking at details on who's getting paid what. Because the last thing the board wants is a scandal because somebody's getting paid some absurd amount of money or.
Or there's inequity, right?
Right. And so I think it's a tough question to answer because the answer is, well, it depends. Right? So in a perfect world, I think in a perfect world where all of the staff, the executive director has a staff working for them that understands how the budget is assembled and it's done really in a just sort of a well-done process and it all makes sense and the board feels really comfortable with it and whatever committee is looking at the budget before it even gets to the final board meeting to be approved, that they feel comfortable with the details, then yeah, I don't think the board should have an opinion at all other than that looks good.
Exactly.
I understand it,
I trust. Right? And I think it's the executive director's responsibility to share, here's how I came up with this, right? Here's the process I used. Here's what informed that process. And at that point, so that's almost where I would love for it to stay, at the board asking those questions, which I don't think is inappropriate because of the fiduciary duty. And then an executive director saying, yeah, and here's the process I used. I used such and such salary survey, right? I used this compensation analysis. I talked to an HR expert. I talked to my peers and did some 990 research. And here's what I came up with. To me, then that should be enough, assuming the board's comfortable with that answer.
Yeah, and again,
it's not that neat, though.
No, right, because then you get to the point where you have to have all the detail available so that somebody can ask those questions.
Yes.
So if everybody gets a raise this year, like a 1.5% raise this year or whatever, because you had a really good year last year and you think you can bring in the money to pay for it, you're going to tell your board, well, yeah, we budgeted for a 1.5% raise for everybody. But then do they ask things like, well, how much have you put in for your payroll taxes? Did you change it so that the Medicaid money that's going out for the payroll taxes is correct? And then you're all the way down the rabbit hole, right? Talking about all of these tiny little microscopic details when you should probably you'd be looking at the bigger picture. I think it's just a tough answer. And I think in really well-run nonprofits, you've got a committee that would then spend the time to understand it and then have the committee be the one that's presenting the budget. So the committee says, we've looked at this. It looks great. We understand how it all works. We think it's a really good piece of work. We're bringing this to the board to approve. And then the board can ask questions of the committee. and not of the staff and the executive director and everything, and allowing them to get into the weeds. We've talked about this before too, because a board member is way less likely to get all up in another board member's business about like what are the details of the plan that you're giving me. So if it's a staff member presenting it, like it's like fair game, like open the floodgates. I'm going to ask you every dumb question I can think of.
Yeah.
But if it's the treasurer or the finance committee chair or the budgeting committee chair, God forbid, if it's one of those, then the questions are a lot more softball, it seems like.
They are. Yeah, there's sort of this mutual respect that, not to go there. And I also, this kind of brings up for me, so many of these things I think aren't black and white or cut and dry because of organizational life cycle stage of an organization. And quite frankly, a lot of this, once again, is a partnership. And I continue to be, there's different roles, but it's a partnership because really the board probably can't set the budget without some direction from the executive director. The executive director needs the board to approve the budget. So it really becomes communication, and the partnership between in this process is critical.
The level of trust, too.
Yes.
Yeah. I have asked board members to resign due to lack of participation, not showing up for meetings, basically doing nothing, and many people think that is terrible. What do you think?
I don't think it's terrible, although I would want to put some context around this, right? So I don't think you can just ask someone to resign when perhaps you never set expectations in the first place. So for me, this just goes back to how did you communicate when they got on the board? What were the expectations? If you're going to do that with one person, you really need to uniformly, consistently do that with everybody. And there needs to be some discussion on the board about how do we handle, right, people who aren't showing up, people who aren't participating. It's a great board discussion, and then you get ownership, and it doesn't make you look like the bad guy or gal doing that. So that's sort of my short answer. But I think that there's also a way of, just like you would do with an employee, there's sort of a system where perhaps it starts instead of just you're off the board, we're firing you from the board. I think there's a system where it starts with sort of a conversation about we've really missed having you at the board meetings and it's really important to have your participation. Has something changed in your life? Are you able to start attending again? So I think you can start it out as sort of, all of this can be collegial. It's about the behavior, not the person. And just like you would do in HR, if you're holding an employee accountable for something that's not being done, I think those same principles apply here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. A board member is volunteering for you, so you need to treat them very nicely, and they're potentially also a donor. So you need to keep that in mind. But I think you're right about setting boundaries and making sure that it's really clear and that you're applying the same rules to everybody.
And I don't think we should be afraid of accountability. I think so much in the nonprofit sector we are, especially around anything to do with volunteers. And so I admire someone who's willing to have those tough conversations. But yeah, let's turn this over to an expert and maybe someone who's been in that position themselves. And what would they say?
Hey there, everybody. Well, we are glad you are joining us for this question because it is a hot topic. And as you know, we like to bring in people we consider to be experts or people who are rolling up their sleeves in the field doing some of this work, because it's way better hearing some of that than just hearing Andy and I blab at you all the time. So with that said, it is my honor to have Tanna Prince here with us today. So Tanna and I have known each other for several years, and Tanna has been a fearless leader and an amazing board president for the Rape Crisis Center based in Las Vegas. So Tanna, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Stacey. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, we're going to dive right in with this question, and would love your perspective as a leader of a board, of a nonprofit board. So the question is, I've asked board members to resign due to lack of participation, not showing up for meetings, and basically doing nothing. And many people think that is terrible of me. What do you think?
I believe it is a board chair's responsibility to monitor, to some degree at least, the activity of the board members. I'm sure many board chairs have had the experience that there are board members that participate more than others. That's a given. As you've told me over the years, as I've experienced, you always have perhaps 3 to 5 that are contributing a great deal. Others have less time, less involvement, less resources. However, if there's too much, in my experience, too much difference in participation, it can pull down the mood and the tone of the entire board. I've had this experience in the past too, where very reluctantly we've had to ask a board member who could not participate to consider exiting the board. I think you have to do that. I think you have to take that responsibility in order to keep some semblance of continuity among all of the board members. If you have a person that's continually not attending, not participating, not fundraising, it impacts the other board members. The RCC has made a commitment in the last 5 years with your help to get our board members more equally involved in not only attendance regularly, but fundraising and participating. And when we're asking everyone to participate, and it's clear to all that 1 or 2 maybe not joining in at all, it really impacts the mood of the board. I think it's a fairness issue. Also, again, I think we fully expect and can tolerate variances in participation based on what's going on in a person's life at a different time. We've had board members need to take a leave or let us know they're going to pull back for a few months when something personal is going on. All that aside, there still has to be some equity or some participation by all board members, or again, it impacts the overall tone and mood of the board, in my opinion.
Well, I love that, and I've admired you because as you and I have talked about, there's a lot of boards out there that have this exact problem that the person wrote in about, and oftentimes there is a board chair or someone on the board in the organization who is unwilling to have that tough conversation, and it really then just it can really, I think, unravel the entire board and really impact the morale, as you've pointed out, the kind of culture and expectation you're trying to set. So kudos to you, for doing that, Tanna, because it's not easy to do that.
No, and I think you have to look to the long game. We all know, practically speaking, that people bring different contributions to the board, and there will be board members that cannot attend many meetings, but perhaps contribute to the board in other ways. All that has to be factored in. What you're really looking for, if you have to have that awful conversation, is somebody who's truly checked out in all respects, who isn't participating in any way, and appears to be, almost by default, resigning themselves. And it's been my experience over the 10 years I've been on the board that by the time someone isn't participating, or even if they're new and they don't start out really involved, by the time you talk to them, they're barely aware that they haven't been involved enough to really be part of the board. So as awkward as the occasional conversation is, it's not been a surprise.
Can we talk a little bit about, because I'm sure people listening are wondering, how do I have this conversation? So can you maybe walk it through with our listeners how you go about it? And I guess layered into that, Tanna, I'd ask you to think about, are there baby steps that are taken before you get to the stage of saying, hey, basically resign your seat on the board? Are there sort of little, friendly reminders, check-ins with people before you get to that critical conversation? And when you do get to that conversation, what does it look like?
Okay. Yeah, I think there's 2 things. One of the most important things that we did at the RCC, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, is draw up an expectations primer, if you will. It's merely a document that says what we expect of you and what you can expect from the RCC. It's separate from the application, and it talks about attendance specifically, that the goal or expectation is that you can attend most or all of the board meetings, the once-a-month board meetings. So I think discussing that expectation with new members is critical. And again, that takes a transition, because if you haven't historically documented that and had that conversation with new board members, it's hard for longer term or older board members to say, well, what's the issue now? Lots of people don't show, or people call in. Yeah. So setting the expectation up front is important. And then the check-ins, absolutely. Again, no surprises here. If I find that we've had a board member that hasn't been at the last 2 or 3 meetings, or I'm not seeing their participation, I reach out to them one-on-one and just check in. And that goes on for a while. Again, this isn't a decision to be made lightly. So it has occurred in the past where somebody said, yeah, I know I haven't been able to attend. Here's why. I'll be back on board in this time frame. And we work through that. So there's no black and white. There's no rushing anybody off. We recognize and value that this is a volunteer board, and we're grateful for anyone's participation. So it's a process, I would say, that would occur over a year or maybe 6 to 12 months, where, again, set the expectation up front for new members, which is the most helpful thing we've found, and then talk to people if you haven't seen them for a while. And other board members may check in with them as well. So it's a team effort, because the other board members that are attending every month notice. Yeah. They haven't seen someone there. And again, it starts to be, I don't want to exaggerate, say it's a cancer, but it can be demoralizing to the board when someone stays on but isn't present at all.
Right. I mean, I know I can speak from experience, and past boards I've served on. It's very frustrating, and candidly, it reflects poorly on the person not showing up, right? I mean, you're thinking, they've made this commitment. They're a board member just like I am, and yet I'm the one doing the work. I'm the one coming to the meetings, and where are they? And who's holding them accountable? And, the board obviously has to really hold itself accountable, and through the leadership of the board chair.
Yes, absolutely. I agree, because I think that as boards evolve and there's a new chair, new expectations get set. I've been a long-term board member for 10 years now, and the chair the last 4. So as I watched the board evolve over the 6 years prior to my taking over as chair, I saw patterns emerge and saw things that we wanted to maybe change and improve when I became chair. So it's really important to reset expectations in a subtle enough way that you're not changing all the rules just because you're the new chair. So I think you have to be very aware that you have to do this slowly, and you have to do it with what has been historically the pattern of the board, not just I'm the chair and now it all changes. So we've been very careful to have that process go slowly and thoughtfully, and never give anyone the impression we're not appreciative of their volunteer efforts on the board.
Is there any advice before we wrap up, Tanna, that you would give to someone who was just going into the foray of being a new board chair? I mean, given your years of experience, and you're truly a role model, in my opinion, of it done well. But any tips or words of advice you'd give?
Well, specific to this question or this issue, I would say if an incoming board chair or somebody fairly new to it should really look to either establishing the expectations or restating them. Perhaps it's always been expected and even stated that meeting attendances and participation, again, I'll mention not just attendance in meeting, but participating in fundraising or in events. If that hasn't been restated and rediscussed among the board, I would readdress the issue. I'd bring it up for input from everybody. How does everyone feel about that? Put it on the table so that over time you can now address it with people without it being a surprise. So I think reminding the board, I mean, we readdress this at least annually in our retreat or in our ongoing governance discussions. It can't be something you only bring up when there's an issue. So that would be my thought, is set or reset expectations and talk about it and get board input, so that it isn't just you, the chair, but other members of the board saying, yeah, I think it's only fair that, we're all trying to be here 75% of the meetings or something of that sort. And I think that makes it less about the chair making a decision than the board agreeing as a whole that this is how we hold ourselves accountable.
I think that is sage advice. I can't thank you enough for taking your time to share your expertise on this topic with our listeners. And Tanna, I just think if every board chair could be like you know, I'm not saying this just to you. I truly have watched over the years how you have grown in your role. How you have really just dealt with things head on, but in a very informed, intentional way. And that is a gift to any nonprofit. So thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Stacey.
We have a longtime donor that occasionally calls and asks us to buy specific items, for example, like Hamilton tickets, for our constituents, and then she reimburses us later. She really means well, and we don't want to make her mad, but it makes us do a bunch of extra work, and sometimes things don't really make sense with our program and mission. Any ideas?
Oh, that's a lot to unpack.
That is.
Because there's like,
where do we start?
Yeah, there's a couple of challenges in there, right? So one of them is that you've got a donor that's directing program activities.
Yes.
Right. Well, number one. And number two, she's asking you to go down and stand in a line to get something, right? And then she's going to pay you back for them later, which adds like weird accounting headaches to it.
Well, it does. And it's also, I mean, you have to hope that you'd really also have to hope the person reimburses you. I mean, it's an expense that you don't have budgeted that, okay, go, right? That just feels it just feels yucky to me on a lot of levels. And probably the donor means well. I guess I'd want to know, why can't the donor just go and buy the tickets and then donate it in kind to our organization for us to use how we see fit?
Yeah, this feels a lot like what Clay was talking about. Clay Buck was talking to us about several podcasts ago about donor dominance and about a donor will tell you something and the staff will just jump because that's the donor and you just do what the donor says, and that's not a really good thing to do. I mean, in this case, I think it would be okay to sit down if you've got a good relationship with the donor, it would be okay to sit down with the donor and say, here's what our priorities are. Right. These are the kinds of things that we're doing. And yeah, that might be a really exciting thing for them to do. But we need to probably figure out a way to plan for it so that it's not a surprise to us. Like, so I think if, for example, having constituents go see Hamilton somehow fits into your mission, I don't know what it is, but if it somehow fits into your mission and you want to do that, like figure out a way to engage with the donor during your planning process to say, can we come up with like a list of the kinds of things that you're going to think about?
Right.
But if it's like when the Knights get to the Stanley Cup playoffs and they're like, we're going to send everybody to Washington to go see a game. I mean, that can come up at the end, right?
Absolutely.
But you still have to, like, you almost want to engage with the donor beforehand to say, can we just put like a budget together so we can sort of throw it in there? And then, if you want to make a pledge for that amount, that at least then we have some way to keep track of it, and it's not like a fire drill every time that you have this new idea. Which and say it in the most respectful way. I don't know how I would do it. I would probably be terrible at it. But
well, because it's also just once you do this once with this donor, you've set this horrible precedent.
That's right.
So I'd rather see someone have that honest conversation up front and explain, like you said. And here's the thing: I think a phenomenal fundraising professional could take this in a way and build, if it made sense with the mission, it could build an entire funding opportunity or program opportunity out of this if it was done the right way, right? You sit down and talk to the donor a bit about, their interest and wishes. And, let's talk to you. Let's share with you these great ideas all year long that we'd love to be able to have our clients experience. And here's what budget we would need for that. So why don't you help us make that possible? Something like that just feels more appropriate. I really am uncomfortable with a donor sort of dictating. It feels like we've talked about donor advised funds before. It feels like sort of quasi donor advised, like here, let me give you something and direct you on how to use it or for what. I mean, I don't think this actually is really a smart way to engage with the donor.
I want to dig into that some more then, because one of the things that you could be accused of as someone working in programs at a nonprofit is being arrogant about your programs. That these are the programs that we have in place. These are the things that we're going to do because we think it's what meets the mission. We think that doing this activity is going to help us meet our mission or figure out what our goal is going to be, right? And so when a donor comes in and has an idea and says, you know what would also help you meet your mission is if you did this other random thing that I just invented. I mean, so should you listen to that person? Should you come up with, should there be a mechanism to be able to listen to people about what they think? I mean, it's hard to talk about it in a really sort of the vague way, right? Without a specific example.
Yes.
But like it, so say, I mean, I know this happened at the food bank all the time. You would get somebody coming in telling you, you know what you ought to do. You know, they have this great idea. You know what you ought to do. And I'd like 99% of the time, yeah, we've thought of that. And here's why we're not doing it, right? Because it's more expensive than it should be. Or the best one is like, aren't you getting all the extra buffet food from the strip?
No,
there's all this extra buffet food that's going to waste. And the reality is none of it's going to waste.
Yeah.
So you're like, you always like shake your head and you're like, yeah, we should figure that out. And just thinking like, you don't know what you're talking about. Of
course.
Right. So I think there's probably an aspect of that in there.
Well, and I feel like, so what's interesting is all I kept thinking when you said that, Andy, was I actually feel like the arrogance, yes, arrogance can come from staff themselves, but I think more so I see that arrogance come from donors or the person who, thinks they're going to go save the world's problems because they've come up with some, novel new idea, which absolutely isn't novel at all. And you have to placate them and make them feel special and stroke their ego that that's some great idea when it really isn't.
Right.
I mean, I guess it seems like you want that balance of great feedback, and we'll take that. We have, a planning retreat every year, and we gather input from people like, you all year long, as well as we actually have this opportunity where we ask our clients what they need. I mean, I think that's the way around it, right?
Yeah.
If you get that feedback from your clients, you say to the donor, listen, they don't really want that. That's not important to them. What they do want is this. So will you help fund that?
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We like it when you come. If you thought this was interesting, if you thought you enjoyed it or you learned something new, share it. We'd love to see you share it. It's really easy to share them on Facebook now because they get posted up on Facebook every time they show up. You can go ahead and share it there, and we will get more people listening, which means more questions, which means better questions, which means more interesting podcast episodes. Thank you to the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, our presenting sponsor. They're the reason that we get to do this, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks.